You don't need to be less human to become more strategic. Growing into senior leadership without losing yourself. By Leslie Rohansi. I don't often write about the end of a coaching engagement. Usually the stories I share in these leadership articles come from the beginning, when a leader is naming the thing that isn't working, or from the messy middle, where self-awareness is rising, old habits are getting exposed, and trying on different ways of leading can feel awkward, vulnerable, and occasionally a bit like wearing someone else's shoes. The ending is different. It's where you find out what actually changed. I recently wrapped up a coaching program with a senior leader I've had the genuine pleasure of working with for several months. Near the end of our conversation, she named something that many leaders I've coached have wrestled with. She reflected on how much of her early career success had come from being deeply involved, highly responsive, emotionally available, and someone people could count on without hesitation. She built strong teams, led in a highly hands-on relational way, and noticed what others missed. She said, "What I'm realizing is that the strengths that help me succeed as a manager and director still matter, but how I express them has to change as I grow into a more senior role." That landed because I've heard versions of this tension many times in coaching conversations. A leader gets promoted because they're capable, dependable, thoughtful, and trusted. They build a reputation by being the person who gets things done, notices what others miss, responds quickly, supports their people, and carries a lot without complaint. Then, somewhere along the way, the feedback changes. Suddenly, they're being told to be more strategic, to lead at a higher level, to stay out of the operational weeds, or to focus less on execution and more on enterprise thinking. And what many deeply relational leaders hear in that feedback is something far more unsettling. Does that mean I need to stop caring so much? Be less available? Become one of those polished executives who have mastered the art of sounding profound while saying almost nothing at all? It can create a genuine identity wobble because for many leaders, especially high performers, the behaviors that built their early success were quite intentional. They became trusted because they were emotionally present for their people. They became promotable because they were dependable and productive. They earned influence because people experienced them as thoughtful, caring, and deeply committed. So when leadership growth requires change, it can create a real fear that the people around you may experience you as less caring, less accessible, or somehow less you. Becoming more strategic can feel unsettlingly close to becoming less recognizable to yourself. My client said something else in our closing conversation that I suspect will resonate with more than a few people. We were talking about confidence in the context of external validation, positive feedback, visible signs of success, and being seen as capable. She said, "Even just becoming aware of that has shifted my thinking. Because once you notice that your confidence has been partly outsourced to the reactions of others, you begin to reclaim some authorship over it." She also described a deeply human aspect of this coaching work. We build insight and self-awareness, and our confidence can feel steady for weeks until something comes along that throws us off balance, and we find ourselves slipping back into old habits of thinking and reacting. That's normal. Greater self-awareness does not mean those moments disappear forever. It means we recognize them faster. With practice, the distance between being triggered and catching ourselves in our old way gets shorter and shorter. We still have the occasional wobble, we just recover quicker. I see this pattern so often in coaching with leaders growing into more senior leadership roles. Many eventually discover that some of their most valued strengths become overstrengths at more senior levels. Responsiveness can become reflexive order-taking, where the instinct to be helpful overrides the discipline to assess whether the ask actually belongs at your altitude. Inclusiveness can become over-consulting, where the desire to bring people along starts slowing decision-making long after sufficient input has been gathered. Ownership can become over-functioning, where personal accountability turns into doing work that should be delegated, because trusting others feels riskier than stepping in yourself. Emotional generosity can become protective insulation, where the instinct to care protects people from meaningful accountability, hard truths, and the consequences that would ultimately help them grow. Those qualities are not inherently problematic. The challenge is that leadership context changes, and with it, what the role actually requires. Many of the skills that help someone thrive as a manager aren't the same ones required for senior or executive leaders to be successful. If you remain endlessly accessible, when do you think? If every decision requires broad consensus, when do you decide? If you keep solving problems your team should be solving, how do they grow? And if your calendar looks like a losing game of executive Tetris, where exactly is strategic leadership supposed to happen? This is where many leaders give me the hairy eyeball because this developmental ask can feel emotionally confusing, as the internal questions sound like, am I becoming colder? Am I losing what made me effective? Am I becoming less authentic? In my experience, the leaders who successfully navigate this transition don't become less human as they grow, but they do become more discerning. They get clearer about where their time creates the most value, become more intentional with their energy and attention, stop equating constant doing with leadership contribution, and learn that protecting thinking time is part of the role, not an indulgence. They also become more willing to disappoint someone in the short term if the longer-term decision serves the broader organization. That is leadership maturity in action. Let me put on the gender lens for a minute. For many women, there can be extraordinary complexity layered into this transition. I say this thoughtfully, not as a sweeping generalization. Many women have spent years being socially rewarded for being accommodating, relational, highly capable, emotionally tuned in, and endlessly dependable. Add perfectionism, caregiving conditioning, or internalized pressure to be both competent and likable, and this transition can carry extra emotional texture. And that means the leadership identity work can sometimes be more nuanced for women. What I have consistently seen in leaders who navigate this transition well is something I deeply respect. They don't harden or become emotionally beige, and they don't confuse detachment with sophistication. They keep their humanity while becoming much more deliberate about where that humanity gets expressed. Before we wrapped up, my client said something that captured this beautifully. It's really about becoming more aware of where I put my energy and time. The things that helped me succeed still matter, but how I do them has evolved. That is leadership growth, learning how to lead in a way that matches the altitude of the role without losing the parts of yourself that made people want to follow your lead in the first place. Your coaching challenge. For the next 2 weeks, become a curious observer of your own leadership habits. Pay attention to moments where you instinctively step in, respond immediately, overconsult, solve a problem that arguably belongs to someone else, say yes when your calendar is already gasping for oxygen, or stay deeply involved in work that may no longer require your altitude. The goal is not to change anything immediately. The goal is to notice. Catch yourself in real time and ask, is this a strength serving the current role or a legacy habit from an earlier chapter of leadership? At the end of your observation period, spend some time reflecting on these questions. 1. Which behavior or behaviors showed up most often? 2. Which of these once served you well and how? 3. What leadership need were these behaviors originally helping you meet? Competence, control, belonging, approval, usefulness, certainty, or something else? 4. Which of these habits now creates drag, exhaustion, bottlenecks, or unintended consequences for you and or others? 5. Where might your team, your peers, or your organization need something different from you now? And 6. What is one small experiment you could try that would better match the altitude of your current role? If you're a leader navigating this leadership transition and want to grow your strategic impact without losing the humanity that helps people trust you, reach out for a free exploratory executive coaching conversation at leslierohansi.com. Have a smooth day.